There's a specific kind of fear that doesn't announce itself. It doesn't show up as panic, it shows up as a quiet, constant sense that you're about to be found out. That whatever success you have is somehow a mistake, a clerical error that hasn't been caught yet. You've done the work, you've earned the position. People around you seem to believe in you, and still, some part of you is waiting for someone to walk in and ask, what are you actually doing here? Franz Kafka wrote an entire novel about a man arrested for a crime that is never named by a court that never explains itself for reasons no one will clarify. For decades, readers treated this as a strange political allegory, but the people who recognize themselves in it immediately, the ones who feel a jolt of discomfort reading it, usually aren't thinking about politics at all. Franz Kafka worked as a lawyer for an insurance company in Prague, writing fiction late at night, terrified of his own father, convinced for most of his life that his writing was worthless. He asked his closest friend to burn his unpublished manuscripts after his death. Nearly everything we now consider essential 20th century literature almost didn't survive, because Kafka himself didn't believe it deserved to. This matters because the trial wasn't written by someone observing impostor feelings from a safe distance. It was written from inside them. The novel follows Josef K, a bank official who is arrested one morning by officials who won't tell him what he's charged with. He's allowed to continue his normal life, his job, his routines, while the case hangs over him, vague and unaddressed. Growing heavier the longer it goes unresolved, Kafka never explains the charge. That omission isn't a flaw in the story. It's the entire point. What Kafka captured before psychology had a name for it is the experience of being judged by a process you can't see for a violation you can't identify with no clear way to defend yourself. This is almost exactly the internal architecture of imposter syndrome. People who feel like frauds rarely point to a specific failure. If you ask them what they're afraid will be discovered, the answer is strangely vague. Not, I lied on my resume, or I don't have the degree I claimed. Just a diffuse sense of not enough competence that feels borrowed, achievements that feel accidental, a self that feels like it's performing a role rather than living a life. Josef K spends the entire novel trying to mount a defense against a charge that's never specified, and this is the detail that makes the trial feel less like fiction and more like a transcript. He keeps looking for the version of himself that would be obviously innocent and can't quite locate it, not because he's guilty of anything real, but because the standard he's being judged by was never made visible in the first place. This is exactly how imposter syndrome operates. The internal court doesn't issue clear verdicts. It doesn't say, you failed at X, so improve X. It operates on a feeling of insufficiency that adjusts itself to stay permanently out of reach. Meet one bar, and the bar that mattered turns out to have been somewhere else. Kafka's biographical detail here is almost too precise. He wrote repeatedly of feeling like a stranger in his own life, present at his job, his engagements, his own apartment, while some essential part of him remained on trial elsewhere in a courtroom no one else could see. There's a particular cruelty to this structure that's worth sitting with. In most trials, the accused can eventually learn the charge, mount a defense, reach a resolution, guilty or innocent, but resolved. Josef K never gets that. The case doesn't conclude with proof. It concludes with exhaustion. This is precisely the trap many high-functioning people describe, the sense that no accomplishment closes the case. Each one is absorbed, filed, and the underlying verdict, not enough, not real, not earned, remains open, untouched by evidence. Here's where Kafka becomes uncomfortable to read closely. Josef K never asks the most important question early enough: who appointed this court? He spends the entire novel responding to the process as though its authority is simply a given, something to be navigated, not something to be questioned at its root. And this is the precise mechanism worth noticing in yourself. The voice that runs the internal trial, the one cataloging your inadequacies, weighing your worth, waiting to expose you, was appointed by someone. It has a history. It was installed by particular people, particular moments, particular relationships, often long before you had any say in the matter. Kafka doesn't resolve this question for Josef K. The novel famously refuses to, but the absence of resolution is itself instructive. A court whose authority is never examined is a court that never loses power. So what does a person actually do with this? Kafka doesn't offer a defense strategy because the deeper problem was never the absence of a good defense. The problem was accepting the premise that a defense was owed in the first place. The most useful question isn't, how do I prove I belong here? It's, what court is this? And did I ever actually agree to stand trial in it? For most people carrying a quiet sense of fraudulence, the answer traces back to an early specific source, a parent whose approval always seemed to move just out of reach, an environment where competence was treated as the bare minimum rather than something worth acknowledging, a single formative comparison that calcified into a permanent internal standard. The practical shift isn't winning the case. It's noticing, for the first time, that you've been treating an unelected court as though it had jurisdiction over you at all. That doesn't dissolve the feeling instantly. Kafka would be the last person to promise an easy resolution. But it changes the question you're asking, not how do I finally prove I'm enough, which has no finish line, but why did I accept this court's authority in the first place, which, unlike the original charge, actually has an answer. Kafka died at 40, convinced his work was a failure, having published only a fraction of what he wrote. The irony is almost too sharp to be comfortable. A man who couldn't believe in the value of his own writing produced one of the most precise descriptions ever written of a mind on trial before a court it never agreed to. The trial doesn't end with Josef K proving his innocence. It doesn't end with the charge ever being named. It ends instead with a question quietly left for the reader. What happens to a person who spends their entire life defending themselves against an accusation no one will state out loud? Maybe the answer isn't a better defense. Maybe it's finally asking who's sitting on the bench.